Hi! In this lesson, we'll take a look at how we can use objects to improve our graphics programs. Objects are a great data structure to use when you want to keep track of a variety of properties related to a single entity. There are endless examples of objects used in many different contexts, but in this lesson, we'll focus on how they can be used when working with Canvas graphics. Imagine a scenario where you want to build an animation of 5 balls bouncing around the canvas. If each ball has a different velocity, as shown in the animation here, then without objects, you'd need 10 variables, a Vx and Vy for each ball, and a whole lot of conditional statements to move and collide them independently. If we create a ball object, on the other hand, we can store this velocity information as properties attached to each ball. In fact, we can store a whole variety of information about the ball for a convenient way to keep track and access it. Now, if we want to use the ball's Vx and Vy properties to move it, we can just use the ball.vx and ball.vy code. But be careful. These are just data properties we've stored in an object, and right now have no connection to what we see here, the graphic circles. Remember that on CodeHS, what we are seeing here on the canvas are graphic circles. For example, here is the CodeHS graphic code that adds a red circle to the canvas. We need access to this graphic throughout our program in order to move it, have it collide with walls, etc. Ideally, we want to somehow have this graphic as information included in our ball object, so that the object and the graphic are linked via a property. So how can we do that? Well, let's create a graphic property and store the value of the circle variable, that is, the circle on the canvas, as the property's value. This makes it super easy to access the graphic circle related to this ball object. For example, let's say this ball object is named ball1. Before, if we wanted to move the circle graphic we added to the canvas, we'd type circ.move vx, vy. But now that we are storing the circle in the graphic property of the ball object, we can write ball1.graphic.move ball1.vx, ball1.vy, where ball1.graphic is really just accessing the graphic value in the ball object. While this seems like this is much more complicated, what this enables is a self-contained ball object that not only keeps track of its own data, but also its own canvas graphic. So now if we have multiple ball objects created and then stored into an array like this, we can now loop through the array and move each ball relative to its own velocity properties. This is so much easier than having 4 graphic circles, each with their own Vx and Vy variables. That's a lot of Vx and Vy variables to keep track of, not to mention a lot of repeated code. Just imagine if we had even more balls bouncing around our scene. The object approach with an array and for loop wouldn't have to change, but without the objects and velocity properties, the list of move statements would be unmanageable. The last thing that we need to address here is that although the move function is moving the graphic, it is not updating the x and y properties that we created in the ball object. Those properties don't have any direct link to the graphic location. So, we just have to simply add these 2 lines in order to keep the properties in sync with the graphic. These add the velocity to the ball's x and y property values, just like the move function adds the velocity to the position of the circle graphic. It's worth mentioning that even having the x and y properties in the ball object is an optional choice we've made. So if you didn't want to keep track of the ball's location, then you wouldn't have to include these additional lines. And that's it. Now it's your turn to practice incorporating objects into your graphics programs.